Hi, everyone. Welcome to Fishtrap's 2022 NEA Big Read Kickoff. My name is Mike Midlow, Program Director here. If you're new to Fishtrap, we're a literary arts and humanities organization in Northeast Oregon's Wallowa County. And our mission is to promote clear thinking and good writing in and about the West. One of the ways we do that is through the NEA Big Read. Since 2006, Fishtrap has participated in the Big Read to broaden our understanding of the world, our communities, and ourselves through the joy in sharing a good book together. This year, Fishtrap celebrates The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. The House on Mango Street is recognized by critics, professors, and readers of all ages as one of the most important contributions to modern literature. It has entered the canon of coming-of-age classics, and we're excited to bring it to you. Over the next 4 weeks, Fishtrap and our partner organizations have created a host of special online and in-person events for you to take in, including discussions, conversations, activities, resources, dance lessons, and even a short film festival inspired by the book. Fishtrap has also provided, get this, more than 600 free books to schools and libraries in both Wallowa and Union counties. Fishtrap's Elizabeth Oliver has worked tirelessly with educators to make sure all students have access to readers' guides, resources to bring this book to life in the classroom. And everybody has the opportunity to enjoy events and resources that you can share with your friends and neighbors on your lunch break or around the dinner table. Find it all at fishtrap.org. Tonight, we have the honor to kick off the Big Read with the novel's author, Sandra Cisneros, coming to us live from her home in Mexico. It's important to note that the NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. I also want to thank this year's Big Read sponsors and funders, the Oregon Art Commission, Pacific Power, Community Bank, and our local bookstore, the Book Loft. Great folks. We couldn't do it without your support. The really exciting thing is how Fishtrap has also partnered in this past couple of years with other organizations to bring the Big Read to even more people in more places. They include Arts Center East and the Cook Memorial Library in La Grande, Oregon, Eastern Oregon University, the historic Union Community Hall, Mama.Film, and the Wichita Public Library. More on that later. Okay, let's get to the Big Read kickoff. I want to introduce you to Fishtrap's Executive Director, Shannon Mcnerney, who has the great honor tonight of speaking with Sandra Cisneros. Welcome, Shannon.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome to everybody who is tuning in with us tonight. I cannot tell you how excited I am to be able to not just share this wonderful book with you, but also to have a conversation with Sandra Cisneros. We had a chance to talk for a little bit here, and if you have not had a chance to hear her speak or read her book, by the end of the night tonight, if you aren't excited and enticed to do so, I don't know what it will take. So I'm super excited to introduce our Big Read author this year, Sandra Cisneros, author of The House on Mango Street and many, many, many other things. Her full bio can be found on her website, and I will not spend time reading that tonight because I want to get right to questions. I also, before we get started, I wanted to thank our schools. We have a bunch of students that are participating this year, and two of our schools, Joseph Charter School, their 8th grade class, and Wallowa High School, have both sent questions in for Sandra, and we're going to try to get to some of those at the end of the evening. So just stay tuned. So Sandra, welcome.
Thank you so much. I know everybody's first a little shocked at how high my voice is, but I think that was given to me as a Trojan horse. I really think that's my disguise. And it also serves me very well because I do a lot of the audio and performance of my characters. And what bothered me when I was younger, my voice, now serves me very well for interpreting my own work.
Well, and you're talking to us from your home in, what is it, San Miguel de Allende? Am I saying that right? Right, so you're in Mexico. Is that Central Mexico? Yes.
I'm in
Please say that correctly so I don't,
San Miguel de Allende, which is about 4 hours northwest of Mexico City in the high desert. Yes.
It's something that I think your audience here will understand, because we're about 6 hours outside of Portland and 4 hours from Boise, also up in the elevation. So it's a little warmer where you are, but I think we have a lot of similarities. So
yes, it's a high desert. So we get cool, cold nights in the wintertime and cool mornings. And then it warms up to like 72 degrees in the middle of the day. And then it drops when the sun sets. Desert.
It sounds wonderful right now. So I wanted to congratulate you on the Big Read book selection. And I was curious, just to start off, how has this been for you, talking to different communities? This book is, almost 40 years old. And how has that been, revisiting an old piece of work? Well, old, but a past piece of work for you, and talking about it to communities after all this time?
Well, it came, the selection from the NEA came at a pivotal time in my life. I'm 67 as of last December, and I started this book when I was 21 years old. I finished it when I was 28, published it when I was 30. And if you had asked me like 10 years ago, did I want to talk about this book? I would have said, no, I don't want to talk about that book. I'm all talked out. But actually, right now is a great time for me to talk about it, because I've been rereading the book, revisiting the book, and reinterpreting the book for 2 projects. One for the House on Mungo Street, the opera, and one for working with a young screenwriter for possibility of a television. One, we hope, we don't know if it'll happen, and the opera, we're pretty sure we're done with it. So that is something I've been working on for the last 5 years. And it's nice when you're older to revisit a book that you did when you were a young woman, because you can see things in it that you didn't explore, that you intuitively knew, but you didn't go deep enough. And so now I feel like I'm adding depth, exploring some of the themes, bringing it up today to where we are in the United States and making it current. And it's been fun.
Have you learned anything new about that particular time in your life as you've been revisiting this again, now that you say you're 67 and you're coming back to this, not as a 21-year-old? I know that this book is not a memoir. You spoke before and in your intro that it's an amalgamation of personal stories and other folks, but have you learned something new as you've gone through?
Well, it began as autobiography, the way all my fiction begins, from some real emotion and some real place. But we forget all the stories that pass through us, that we heard or witnessed or felt or read about. That's part of our history too. So sometimes you might have witnessed something that happened to someone else, and you can write it in the first person to make it a stronger story. So when people ask me, the question they always ask is this true? Did this happen to you? Well, you have to think about all the stories that stream through you like water. And they might not have happened to you, but you felt them, witnessed them, heard them, interpreted them. So some parts of it are very autobiographical, the neighborhood. And as when I began it, I thought it was just going to be memories. But as I grew up, as I traveled and worked as a teacher in a very poor school in Chicago, I just felt very powerless as a teacher to help my women and my young men who were suffering from getting beat up, maybe from lovers or gang members in their neighborhood or their parents, and or who were having too many children when they were still children, or who were going through all kinds of problems that were bigger than what I had faced as a teenager. So I didn't know what to do about these stories that they shared with me. I couldn't walk away from them. I couldn't sleep. So I just wove them into this autobiographical neighborhood and started putting my students and my counselees in there. And then it became a piece of fiction because I was altering rather than just remembering. I might take, like if you told me a story of something that happened to you and I'd say, oh, that's terrible, Shannon. tell me about it. And then I would say, oh, that happened to someone else I knew. And I took your story and the other person and I put it together to make it more whole. Well, is that real? Well, yes, but not exactly, you see? So I kind of manipulated reality the way artists do, because stories very rarely come to us perfectly. We have to sometimes shape them to make them more whole, more complete, so they can have a beginning and a middle and an end.
How do you balance that when you're telling some of these stories are, very painful and very personal, and you're pushing them and melding them into fictional characters? Is there a line that you have to be careful with when you're doing that, with telling someone else's story? How do you balance that?
No, when I began it, I was very naive. And so I wrote about relatives and people without changing their gender or their names. I was too young to know what to do. But as I got older, I realized, you have to change names. Sometimes you have to change people's situations so they don't recognize themselves. I started becoming a fiction writer through writing House on Mango Street. And one of the things that I've learned when you're writing is to work from some place of love. You try to write from someplace higher than your small ego. And I always try to ask my guides, my spirits, my ancestors, okay, I'm doing this con puro corazón, with all my heart and for a good reason. And I want to do it with love. So let me get my ego out of the way, my own agenda. Let me write from some pure place. And I trust when I write without my ego, that something better than what I thought of is going to happen. And House taught me that I didn't learn it right away, but like 10 years after I finished it, I realized that I had written from a place of pure love without any idea that I was going to get any awards, any money, any attention, because I was writing for a small press when I was finishing, the book, not when I began, but by the time I finished, it was a small press. I think I got $500 for the first printing. And, I just didn't expect anything. I just wrote it to help my students, and I wrote it with lots of love. And I wrote about my relatives and my family con puro amor. And I'm convinced that whatever we create with pure love, with no personal agenda, is always going to turn out well. And it may not bring us what we thought it would bring us, but it will bring us something better. And House did that for me. It has reminded me, and above all, that must be a law of the universe.
I love that. That's such a part of what we try to do at Fishtrap with, focusing on generative writing. The goal is to just create, just write. Don't worry about where it's going to be or who's going to read it, but just write for the love of writing. So that's,
I think a way to dissolve your ego, because we all have an ego, it's natural, is to think about writing in service. Think about, how can I be of service for all the people that I have witnessed who are hurting, who are wounded, perhaps who are wounded from a wound that I have? How can I be of service to them? And how can I honor their stories? How can I honor my ancestors and make them proud? And if you think about honoring your ancestors or serving others, your ego just goes out the window. So that's a good way to kind of check your ego and do it for others and do it with love.
Thank you. One of the questions I wanted to start off with was to get, especially for our Northeast Oregon audience, a good solid kind of foundational definition from your point of view. When we talk about Chicano culture or Chicano literature, what do you mean when you hear, or what do you hear or think of when you hear that phrase?
Well, it's not a ubiquitous phrase. It would be like saying feminist literature. Just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you're writing feminist literature. So Chicano for me is a word that was created during the civil rights movement of the 60s and 70s by people of Mexican and Mexican indigenous roots. And it was a term they created to call themselves. It does have indigenous roots, and it was a word they wanted to name themselves and also to empower themselves. So it's used by people who are aware of the historical struggle of people of Mexican American, Mexican indigenous, Mexican borderlands descent. And so you have to be aware of the social history and what it means to call yourself that, just like you have to be aware of the women's struggle to say you're a feminist. You know, you're not just born Chicano. It's one that a term you claim and accept.
That's good to hear. I just some clarification that it's a self-identifying word,
Yes.
that it comes from the culture. It is not a label that's been placed from a dominant culture.
Right. And some people in the Southwest feel very comfortable with it. And some people in the Midwest who didn't grow up necessarily in the rural parts of the United States, like my brothers, feel very uncomfortable with it because, we had other words we use. So it really is very geographic. I moved around, so I've heard different terms used. And now at 67, I live in Mexico, and I feel very differently about what I call myself.
So with that in mind, what do you hope that a reader who I want to go both directions. I want to go a reader who may later identify themselves as part of that culture or part of the broader Hispanic or Latinx culture in the United States, identify from that book. And also, what are you hoping white readers or African-American readers or other folks who aren't part of that culture, what do you hope they learn from your writing?
Well, I hope they see themselves. I think that's what all great literature is about, when we see ourselves in people who don't look like us, and that we're ever after, we're going to look at people who aren't like us in a different way and see ourselves. When we can recognize ourselves and people who are the opposite of what we look like or how we grew up, that's the power of literature. And so I'm hoping that the House on Mango Street isn't in Chicago, that it's in every community, that everyone will recognize that address. I tried not to mention what city the story took place in, because I thought that way everyone would say, oh, I know that house, I know that address. And that was my hope, and it still is.
I can smell it when I walk in, when I open the door. So I want to transition a little bit and talk about Mango Street. I spoke with you a little bit earlier, and I've told other people I have never read a book that captured that time between childhood and adolescence the way this book did. And I had a couple questions about that specifically. There is a theory that says that you are drawn to a time period. You're drawn to a time period that is impactful for you. And I was curious if that was the case with Mango Street. Sorry about the interruption here, but if that was the case with Mango Street for you, was that time period particularly significant, that kind of heading into adolescence? Was that an impactful period for you?
I seem to go back to that time, whether I like it or not. It's always a part of what I write about. I think artists are always in that nepantla, like that between zones of between worlds of adulthood and childhood. I think artists are always children in the best sense, and that they continue playing and they have that kind of innovative mode and a different way of seeing. But for me, I have to be very careful that I don't write in that voice, because that voice is one I feel very comfortable with, that I go back to a lot. I dream in that time. I go back to that neighborhood in my dreams. It's like a very strong archetype in my subconscious. And I don't know. I just feel, I still feel at 67, like if you asked me, people see the outside me, but all of us have an interior age that we're lodged at. If you ask anyone, they'll ask them, what age are you really inside? What age do you feel? And I feel very close to 11, 12, 13, that inside, I still feel like that girl child, even though on the outside, I'm 67. So I think that's one reason why it's so easy for me to write from that perspective.
It's such an interesting age to focus on, because you really are, I used to teach middle school, and I remember thinking at the time, and I even had a master teacher that told me that 11, 12, 13, they can walk in and be little children 1 minute, and the next minute we'll sit and debate politics. And it's that your book captures that. There was one I was looking here, as a chapter called Hips, that I think exemplifies that. And at the very end is there's the jump rope game that's going through in the language. And I remember this paragraph stopped me cold. It's Nenny, I say, but she doesn't hear me. She is too many light years away. She's in a world we don't belong to anymore. And I still tear up when I read that, because that feeling of just the nostalgia and the childhood that's leaving. So it was so powerful. So forgive me, I had to fangirl a little bit.
That chapter was fun for me to write, because I had to research all those jump rope songs and those clapping songs with my friends. I would just interview people and say, what song did you know that you still know by heart? And I would collect them and for that chapter. So that was fun. That's something that, girls know and girls grow up with. And even when you're 67 years old, you can remember those clapping and jump rope songs. So I was happy to be able to use them somewhere.
Well, and the other piece too that was strong about that is that you're also writing about some things that are very dark, and sophisticated and not sophisticated, dark. I will just say dark, dealing with, initial unpleasant experiences with sexuality, and how you did that and were able to speak about it without speaking about it. How can you talk a little bit about that process?
Yeah. When people think that I planned all this out, but the order that you see the stories was not how I wrote them. I don't write from left to right, and I don't write from top to bottom. And this might help younger writers. I write buttons, what I call buttons, just little scenes of dialogue that I start someplace I wish I could forget. And that's a good place to begin. Write about the things you want to let go, you want to release. And sometimes they're visual scenes. Sometimes they're things people said to you to disempower you. And, things that are very uncomfortable to write about. And so a lot of times there were things that people said to me as my students, as my consulee, because I was a counselor also. There were things that reminded me of unpleasant things that happened to me or to people I love. And I wrote about them in little buttons, and I would collect them like the way, someone making a dress might pick up buttons on the street or at a flea market until you have a whole bunch of them. And then you just kind of lay them out, and you can move them around until you have something that looks like a story. And a lot of times that's how they happened. Or a lot of times I didn't have anything except a title. Someone would look at my feet and say, "Man, you have little feet." And I would say, "Our whole family has little feet." And then I'd say, "Oh, I should write a chapter called The Family of Little Feet." And I would just save these titles like buttons. And then I would sit there and I would force myself, okay, now you must write a story called The Family of Little Feet.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, what'll that be about? Oh, I remember that time that we borrowed those shoes from that neighbor that she gave us a bag of shoes. And then it would just go and I'll just follow it and see where it takes me. So a lot of times it's just, a title, a little button. I try to look through my files of buttons and find something I feel excited about. But making a list of the things you don't want to talk about, the things you wish you could forget, that's very powerful.
And that you find out later, I would guess that the gift is that also is unfortunately a thread that crosses cultures and crosses experiences and economic levels.
And it's very healing. Some things that I have been silent about for 20 years, when I write about them, it's a way of exorcising them. Exorcising, not exercising, exorcist, from my heart. And some of them you can't get rid of. You're just going to have to learn how to live with that ghost in the house of your spirit. But a lot of times, each time I write about something that I want to be healed from, I get closer to releasing it. And sometimes I just learn how to live with it. But it is healthy for me to work from that place. I think maybe most of my writing for me comes from a deep empathy I have from other people who are wounded. I always look at the person in the room who's the shyest, the quietest, the one with the crooked bangs and the bad clothes, because that was me. And I will write from that perspective because I know what it feels like to have a whole day when no one talks to you. I know what it is to not be popular, or for you to feel to be made less than because people judge you by your clothes, or you're not pretty, or you're not popular, or you stutter, or your teeth are crooked, or whatever it is that makes you feel out of it, out of what's cool. And, I find myself writing from that place because I lived it, I witnessed it, and I can understand what it is to live through that experience. And that's very healing for me to write from that perspective for others, but mainly for myself.
Mm-hmm. That's also a writing place of love that you've given. What you spoke to earlier is by writing your own experiences and that old pain, you've given that to others. I think that's pretty amazing. The other thing that I was curious about early on, one of the earlier chapters, Kathy, Queen of Cats, which is also a title I love. At the end, you were talking about how do I know this is so? She told me so. In the meantime, they'll just have to move a little farther north from Mongo Street, a little farther away, every time people like us keep moving in. That was another one that stopped me cold. I was curious about how old you were when you realized that there were people that thought of you as other.
Well, I've written a story called 11 about my first awareness of being viewed in a less than loving way. And in real life, I was 9. I was in 3rd grade, and it's a story that's often anthologized in my book, Woman Hollering Creek, and other stories, but it's in a lot of textbooks and in standardized tests, 11. But I changed the age so that I could be a little more articulate, so that the protagonist could be more precise with language. But I was actually 9 years old. You know when your teacher or classmates don't love you. You can be younger than 9. But for me, it was shocking because I had so much love at home. My family was very supportive and loving. I had 6 brothers, and, of course, they make you cry, but that's their hobby. You don't have to believe them. But I still lived in a very warm home. And for me to realize at a very young age that even my teacher looked at me as being less than was shocking. It's something that I carried as a wound, and I wasn't able to write about this incident that the story is based on until I was 30 years old. It's a story about a little girl in school who is judged to be the owner of an ugly, ratty old sweater that's been in the cupboard for months, and it's all ugly and stretchy and smells bad, and everybody remembers it belonged to her, even though she insists, no, that's not mine. So that's what the whole story is about. And it's 4 pages. You can read it quickly, but it's my story that I like to read when I come into an audience that is most unlike me.
That, on top of the piece, the stories about the feminism that's in your writing and writing about misogyny, that confluence of the misogynistic characteristics. I think there are some lines in that the story that or your book that go through with that too. Can you talk a little bit about feminism and how that is a thread in your writing?
When I was writing House on Mongo Street, I was 21 years old when I began it. 21, maybe I just turned 22, because it was the 2nd semester of graduate school. So I just turned 22. That's more precise to say I was 22. And I didn't have any ism. I wasn't a feminist, or had no politics. I wasn't anything. I was just young. And, I was writing my way through my own search for my identity and for my direction. Because, you know, when I was in graduate school, the women's movement was very strong, but I didn't understand it. It didn't speak to my experiences, or, you know, also you have to admit the media made fun of the feminists and ridiculed it and made it seem very superficial. So of course, you know, I didn't know anything about it. It wasn't until I left graduate school that I started meeting people that were filling in the gaps for me in my education as a person who had roots in the Americas, and started sharing with me books written by women in the Americas, and that I started understanding what feminism was about. But, you know, even before I had that, I was writing my way through it, through my character, who, like me, was searching for another way to be a girl. And, you know, I was looking for a way to be a girl and still love my family and not upset them. So, you know, there were things I didn't want. And in my neighborhood, my students also were searching for the same thing. So I didn't realize I was writing a feminist book. I just was writing for clarity. You know, what do I say for this girl whose father wants her to quit school so that she can earn money to help out, and because she already has 2 kids and she needs to help out to raise her children. You know, she's a single mom. What do you say to parents like that? So, you know, I just wrote about my students, and I wrote about the young men and the young women, mainly the women that I witnessed. And, you know, when I was writing the book, I remember like some way midway between the book, I was working on a dining room table at my boyfriend's house. And I shouted, "Hey, this girl's a feminist." It never occurred to me. And my boyfriend was an architect, and he was working in his office, and he shouted back, "Well, what do you think? Look who wrote it." And I thought, oh, I am too. Oh, it never occurred to me. You know, was this one of those things that it was as if I put the little puppet of Esperanza on, and I was making this little theater, and she was talking, you know, and allowing me to speak. And I discovered through this little character a way to be and a route to go. I knew more than anything, I didn't want to go that way. I don't want to be like her. I don't want to be like her. But I didn't have a model. What I wanted to be. And I was using a younger voice to allow me to speak, because I was going through a really difficult time in my 20s and making a lot of mistakes. I feel ashamed about some of the mistakes I made, but you have to make horrible mistakes, because the success is how you get up from those mistakes. And I was able to survive what I call exploding cigars of my life in my 20s, the stupid mistakes I made. And I was very ashamed of my life, and I couldn't write about it. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why I felt comfortable speaking with a younger girl's voice. The young woman who was living her life in her 20s was embarrassed and ashamed of herself, and felt foolish and depressed and suicidal. But the young girl, Esperanza, saved my life and allowed me to get up from mistakes that young women make and continue forward.
Wow. It almost sounds like, well, like I say, that she was the spirit, the Esperanza, the spirit that kind of
spirit guide, you know. And I think about it, she was like, she kept me alive during the darkest parts of my life. Because as I tell young women, the 20s for me, the hardest decade, because you're trying to please everyone except you. You know, what church and culture and father and neighbors want you to be. And, you know, if you had a dream like mine, it's totally the opposite of what all of the above want for you. So I had a really dark time. You know, you don't know how to become a writer and become an artist if you come from a working class house like mine. And, you know, your parents cannot connect you with the New York publishing industry. You don't know how to do it. You know, I'm sorry. And, you know, even if you went to a fancy graduate program like I did, you still feel like you don't belong there and you don't speak. So, you know, I remember I was in graduate school with Joy Harjo, the National Poet Laureate, and she and I didn't say anything, you know, because one of the reasons why we didn't say anything was because when we did, you would get cut down either by a silence that cut you down or by something someone said, even the teacher. So we learned, don't say anything if you want to survive. I think back now and I tell Joy, wow, no one could invent our destiny, because who would think that you and I, who were the most terrified and the most quiet students who didn't speak for 2 years in graduate school, and now we have a platform to speak. Isn't it life just so amazing? And other people that we thought that were smarter and more wealthier and had connections would do much better. And we certainly didn't expect to survive. And look at where destiny has put us. We could never have invented this story called our lives.
I can resonate with that so much. The 20s, I've told many people in my life that my 20s were a hot mess. And I think that's such a difficult time. It's like you're instantly supposed to be an adult and have everything figured out. And you're just a kid with better clothes. I mean, it's just such a hard time. So
yeah, and I felt a lot younger than my years because I didn't know how to make coffee. I couldn't drive. I couldn't make a meal. Like some people like my age, they knew how to do those things where I knew nothing. I just, the only thing I could do was speed read, and that was it. And I just felt like I felt very inadequate to what was expected of me.
Yeah. Well, you were a woman with a boyfriend that was an architect, so you did okay. Even
no,
then.
That was the most notorious relationship.
Oh no! Okay.
Maybe one up because I really knew how to pick the most disastrous men on earth. So
it's a gift. Well, I want to move to
the next book of essays. I promise. So don't.
Oh boy, I can't wait. Well, I want to move a little bit to some more to the writing process. But before I do that, I if anybody is watching who has not listened to the audiobook, I'm lucky that I was able to do both, read the book and listen to the audiobook. It's a revelation. And I wanted to talk with you a little bit about that process, about reading your work, and also to see what advice you would have. We have lots of writers that are listening tonight that read their own work. Yes. And in your case, what was so lovely for me is that I you read and you hear voices in your head, hopefully just from the book, but you hear these things in your head. And then to hear your voice, it gave a whole new meaning or more nuance, I guess, to what I was reading. So could you talk a little bit about that process and yeah.
Yes. Well, for me and for writers like me, we're collecting voices, actually. We're like catching spoken language and putting it in print. And then when we perform it, we're just like releasing butterflies. So we're letting it go again. So we know how it should sound. So first, I want to say that a lot of my writing is based on spoken speech. And it's based on a particular rhythm that I call English with syntax and worldview in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean, I grew up with, it was my first language when I was a little kid, speaking Spanish and English to my parents, Spanish to my father and English to my mother. They both spoke Spanish, but my father was first generation. And, so when you grow up with two languages like that, they superimpose and they do things to each other. And I think, I know that this English that I write is influenced by the syntax of the Spanish language and by an indigenous worldview that is part of Mexican Spanish, very particular to Mexico. For example, in Mexico, if you say that you were sick, you will say, oh, I was sick. To emphasize, you repeat. To enferma, you repeat. And I believe that that's part of like a layer that's underneath the indigenous languages, that some of which have been forgotten, but have floated up into the conqueror's language, the Spanish. So you see a lot of things like that are very particular. The diminutive, everything's diminutive in Spanish, not to make it little, but to make it sweeter. And you'll see that in the Nahuatl too, in the Aztecs language, that there's a diminutive, and that happens to get superimposed onto the Spanish from the hundreds of years of the conquest. So, and I think that happens too with languages that people bring to the United States from other cultures. They add like a little spice to the English literature and make it particular and make it their own. And I wasn't aware of this when I was writing House on Mungo Street until I wrote a letter to someone who didn't speak English, and I was forced to write to them in Spanish. And as I was writing, I said, this sounds very familiar. What does this remind me of? It sounds like the House on Mungo Street voice. And that was the first time I realized that the Spanish, even though I hadn't put a word, maybe there's one word, in the entire book, it was there, like the layers of civilizations that you find in Mexico with the pre-conquest architecture, and then the Catholic churches built with the same stones, the past and the present, all one thing. I think that's fascinating. And that's something that I became aware of in the language and in the voice on House on Mungo Street. But getting as far as performing, I think it's important that we read our work out loud. And I began by reading when I was an undergraduate at coffee houses. That was a way for me to listen to poets who and performers who I thought were good and to try to learn from them. I've admired very much Sherman Alexie and his performance style, the poet Martin Espada, Lois Ann Yamanaka from Hawaii, Denise Chavez from New Mexico. These are some of my favorites, and I've listened to them and watched what they do. But I also had a friend who was an oral interp teacher. So if you can, try to learn from people who are training actors. Mm-hmm. And just one week or couple of weeks performing with professional people who can teach you how to perform is so important, because a lot of times readers cannot come to the page, but we can come to them. And I just think it's vital that we learn how. I was very shy, and I'm surprised now at how much I love performing. I was the shyest person in the classroom, the person that would look down when the camera clicked. And now, like, the more people there are in the audience, the better. Mm-hmm. I love it. So, even if you're shy, consider training with someone who is a professional at training actors. You need it. It's part of what your repertoire. You're just going to need it.
I appreciate that. And thank you for saying that. I don't often hear writers talk about that they're actually performing their work. And I think that gives a different weight to it, because that's and that's what an audience, whether they know it or not, I think that's what they're expecting is
your audience came and they got out of the house, or they sat down in front of the screen, and they're giving you the most expensive gift, their time. So you must honor that and give them a great show. You want them to go to other readings. You want to empower them. You want to change them. You want to change their point of view. So think of that, the power you have in reading a story or performing poetry, a gift that you give to each of your listeners that will help heal them, may help change them, help guide them. I see art as medicine. So I think it's the work we're doing as writers is one that maybe in another time we would have been the shamans or the visionaries of the community. I think we still are, but we have to know how to use our magic and our artistry in a way that really can bless the listener.
Well, this conversation is going by quickly. I want to ask one more question before I turn it over to some questions we've got from the county. I described your book to a friend as poetry disguised as a novel. And I'm curious about, I hope that's okay to say, but that's how it struck me, is this is poetry, but it's a novel, but not really. And how you mix those two genres in a way that's approachable to people who love both or either.
Yes, absolutely. I'm very flattered by that, because, I wanted to cross-pollinate poetry and fiction, and very short fiction. I was influenced by the vignettes that Jorge Luis Borges wrote in a book called Dream Tigers, a compilation that was created in the United States. It doesn't exist as Dream Tigers in Spanish. I mean, those stories do exist, but in a different collection. And I was so intrigued by little stories that were 1 page long, and they had the kind of music and resonance of poetry. And I said, oh, I'd like to try that. Also, it's not intimidating if you're writing a story that's like a paragraph long or page. You think, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to do that. And I think that that's great, especially like if you're a teacher or a mom, you don't have a lot of time. So if you think about writing a story that's 1 page or a paragraph, it's kind of like a haiku, you think, I could do that. That's not so intimidating. And that's how I wrote House, thinking there're going to be little things, and I don't know where it's going to take me. I just keep making my buttons and collecting them. And then once I had a whole bunch of them, I could lay them out and kind of see a story developing, because I wasn't aware in the beginning that it was going to be a story that you could open at 1 page, read one, or you can go from the beginning and then it's a story cycle.
Well, I thank you. I have some questions from from students, so I want to make sure. I wish I could ask them all, so I'm going to tell the kids that are listening or will be listening later. I don't have time to ask them all, but and some of them I think have been answered. So do know that. But Mrs. Keffer's 8th grade class in Joseph sent some great questions, and I want to start with some of those, including this is from Bobby Nichols. He asked, was there a certain thing or person that motivated you to become a writer?
Oh, that's a nice question. There wasn't a person. I think that it was more circumstance of me moving a lot and me being an only daughter. I felt I was alone a lot, and I felt more comfortable with books. At first, I was a visual artist. I still am a visual artist. So I like drawing. And then I just transferred that same thing I was looking at in the drawings to writing. I started writing poetry in about the 6th grade. But a lot of it was because I was alone. And I felt very close to things of the spirit, like, trees, animals, the sky. I felt more comfortable talking to trees than to people. And I just felt, sensitive to conversations with plants and animals, and, the kind of thing that, people might make fun of you, but I felt very comfortable and at home in that world. And, I think if I had been the popular girl, I wouldn't have been listening to the trees or to the clouds or to the sky. So it helped me to be kind of awkward, to be the new kid, to not be allowed necessarily to join in public games with my brothers, and to spend, by default, a lot of time by myself. Because what you need as a writer is you need to be a witness. Mm-hmm. If you're an actor in the performance of life, you're not witnessing. Mm-hmm. And you might not like being a witness and being on the sidelines, but you're paying attention. And that's what an artist does. You're also feeling things very deeply. And that's what an artist does. So I was in training for my profession without even knowing it. And I had such a deep sensitivity to things of beauty. Often things that were very beautiful, like sunsets, would make me cry. Mm-hmm. And I could just feel people and animals' pain very deeply. I was very much an empath, but I didn't know that there was a word for it. And now I realize all of that, the unpopular person, the quiet person, the person that's the crybaby, you're just ready to be a poet. That's the poet in the class. You're not the popular, smart, the one who's the witness and who's feeling things and breathing in all the pain and the happiness around you. That's the artist.
My father used to say, be careful of the quiet ones. So he was talking about me. Some people aren't going to remember that, but there you go. So Jaden Zolman, who's an 8th grade student at Joseph, also wanted to know if it's hard or stressful to write a book.
It is very stressful to be a successful writer, because when you're not successful, you just write when you feel like it. But as soon as you've sold a book, and usually you've sold it before you finished it, it's like, oh, now I've got to get that book done. And now it's got to be great. And, it just stresses and blocks you out. So success is very stressful. And now I make my living, I'm ashamed that I'm afraid to tell my agent, like, I'm thinking of writing, whatever, because then they'll say, oh yeah, we want it. And as soon as they do that, they spook the muse away. So that's the dark shadow side of the success. When you don't know that anyone's waiting for it, and they're not waiting for you to hand it in or to pay you, or the worst part is they already paid half of it and you already spent it. That's the worst part, But when you're just writing, and when you're writing something like poetry, they don't care. But if you're writing prose, a novel, get that book done. That's spooky.
Your work becomes your art, becomes your commodity. Yes, it's a scary thing. So we have some questions from Wallowa High School. These students are more circumspect with identifying themselves. So these are kind of collective questions. This is a good one. I loved this. Do you plan on continuing your career in writing for as long as you can, and why?
Yes, because I'm young. I'm just 67 years old. I'm finally just learning how to write, and I haven't written my best book yet. So I hope I have many more years. I want to write till the very last. I just finished reading the biography of Thomas Hardy, and he did like his best work when he was over 70. The women writers I admire the most did their best work after 65. So I'm inspired by these writers. I think that you need a long view, and you need to acquire wisdom, and you need to read a lot of books. And I'm still discovering new writers, especially in Spanish, that I have never read before. So I feel like I'm just beginning to learn my craft, and I hope I'm writing on the very last day that I live.
One of the students also wanted to know if you've noticed any influence of your writing on someone else's craft, or has anybody author said, or have you picked up on an influence that you've provided?
I read lots of books by young Latina writers that sound like House on Mango Street. Agent will say, doesn't this sound like your work? And so I do. I really want writers to not write like me, to maybe to imitate me so they can learn how to find their own voice. But I really want them to write like themselves, because no one can sound like you. But first you have to imitate. That's what we all do as writers, until we come full circle and come back to our own voice.
Somebody also wanted to know about critics. How do you respond to critics or feel about critics who don't like your work? It's a great question for a high school student. Yeah.
Yes, there are some critics that have been the anti-Sandra Cisneros fan club, and I've had those in my life, but they don't bother me. I just figured they must be very unhappy, frustrated writers, and I feel sorry for them. I just don't understand how they could waste energy writing negative things. They could have been writing a new poem or a story or something great, instead of putting, I just hope that they find happiness, and they're like mosquitoes, you just have to just say, not that.
I'm going to close it on a question that I identify with very strongly. And it's kind of personal, but it made me laugh. So I have to read this question. Do you ever regret your choice in not getting married or having so many pets?
Oh, I never regret pets. I wish I had more. And unfortunately, the only regret I had in my life was having to give away some of my pets when I moved to Mexico, because, I couldn't bring a parrot because of avian flu. I had to thin my herd and give my cats away and some of my dogs. That's the only regret I have. And as far as marriage, the only time I really wanted to get married was when I felt that person in my life, I either felt that person was divinely chosen, that there was some spiritual connection, something that, was bigger than me. But in retrospect, I am so glad that I did not. And I feel no regrets. I feel relief. I think every relationship, good or bad, or usually both, they're good and bad, brought me to who I am today. And so I'm grateful for all of my relationships, even the disasters, because they were able to bring me to who I am today. And I'm really happy now. I used to cry every month when I was in my 20s. I cry now out of joy, whereas before I used to cry out of loneliness and unhappiness and fear, frustration. Now I cry out of joy, and I don't feel lonely. And I don't feel, I mean, we all get depressed sometimes, but I don't feel helpless or frightened the way I was when I was 20. I don't feel like incomplete because I'm not with somebody. I feel complete and happy, and I get a lot of love from places I didn't look for love when I was younger. When I was younger, I looked for love in a person, you know, and now I know that an app isn't going to give me love. You know, I'm not going to find it in a person. I'm going to find it in myself and in my relation to everything in the universe, whether it's the same thing I fell in love with when I was a kid, the sky, the clouds, the plants, the animals, and I'm back where I began. And I just feel this great love from, you remember Snoopy? He was always in love with Lucy, and she never paid attention to him. She was looking for love, and he was always like, just like me. I feel like everything around me, whether it's little or large or a mountain or an ant, is giving me so much love all the time that I feel happy and complete. And I don't need a nap. I'm beloved and loved, and I send love to so many people, and I feel like this is the happiest time in my life.
Oh, that just makes me happy. And I know you had somebody you wanted to introduce us to, I think. Yes. Speaking of love.
One of my many creatures that gives me love. This is Naui. Naui, say hello. And Naui is a Mexican hairless mixed with an applehead Chihuahua. And she has only little furry feet and furry hair, and she's kind of naked otherwise. She comes to all my Zooms. She just woke up. She's under a blanket. She doesn't want much. Right, Naui? Yeah.
Sandra, thank you so much for taking the time to speaking us here. I hope you make it out to see us.
If anyone needs to ask me a question that I didn't answer, don't forget I have a website, www.sandracisneros.com, and there's a place where you can read about my animals, you can ask questions, you can see what's new. There's all these fun things to do on my website, and I answer all my mail. I do it every month. So just wait a little bit, 4 weeks, and I will answer your letter. Okay?
You are a delight. I am so happy to have gotten to speak with you, and I hope it's the first of many conversations to come. Thank you for joining Fishtrap's Big Read. So next up, for those of you that have joined us tonight, we have this is the kickoff. So we're just starting 4 weeks of programming with the Big Read. If you go to our Big Read page on our website, you'll see a full list of events that are coming up, and I'm going to tell you about the next few. The next event is this Saturday at Art Center East, our neighborhood writing about home. And then it's followed by, which I love, I think, Sandra, you love these too, the House on Mongo Street read-arounds. So participants are going to read aloud from or just listen to the House on Mongo Street, which is a wonderful way to experience it. There are 3 different times for that event. One at the EOU reading room. Actually, that's not true. There's 2 at the EOU Library Reading Room and 1 at Art Center East. And then next week on the 23rd, next Wednesday at noon during lunch, Fishtrap is hosting a book discussion about the House on Mongo Street on Zoom. There will be a link to that. It'll be with me. So if you want to come and listen to me geek out or talk about this book and how it's impacted you, I would love that. So please bring a lunch and come join us for a conversation about the House on Mongo Street. Again, I want to thank all of our sponsors and partners for all of their help in getting this event off the ground and helping us this year. And here's hoping that next year we'll be in person as well as online. And I just want to thank you again. So all of you have a wonderful night.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.